Hello, and welcome back. This is the 7th episode of The State of Things, and I am C.K. Slater, and I'm glad to bring you this week my guest, Jon McGowan. Now, Jon, could you tell our audience a little bit more about yourself and your political background?
Well, my name is Jon McGowan. I've been involved in politics for a very long time. I got involved right in college. Right around September 11th was kind of the time I went back to college, so I got pretty involved at that point in time. I started working on campaigns. I worked on statewide campaigns. I worked on a U.S. Senate campaign, Chief Financial Officer campaign, which a lot of people don't realize we actually elect the Chief Financial Officer here in the state of Florida.
Isn't it Atwater at the moment?
It's Atwater. He just resigned. Governor Scott's going to appoint a replacement, and that's going to make the next election cycle interesting. So I did that for about a decade. Got out of it, opened up a business that was in a different industry. I opened up a gun store, ran that for 7 years. But politics is one of those things that when it's in your blood, you just don't get out of it. You're constantly going to be doing it. And I continued to dabble in it while even though I wasn't on campaigns. I ran for a local office at the beach, been involved with campaigns since then, but my capacity just changes and it morphs. I even did a radio show for a while here in Jacksonville.
And if I remember correctly, that ended about 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, pretty much on the nose. Just under 2 years ago. I was on WBOB, which is a local conservative station, and at the time, Lenny Curry, who's our current mayor, was on that station. He had a daily show. Cindy Graves, who was pretty big in the local Republican Party. The two of them had a show together. I did a weekly Saturday show, and my focus on the show was state politics. And I think state politics is one of those things that doesn't get heavily, it doesn't get the proper amount of coverage. People get very focused on national politics. It's a lot easier to follow. It's a lot sexier. It's a lot more interesting because you can follow it with broad strokes. But
you can watch TV and follow national politics. You can't just watch TV and follow state and local.
Yeah, and state and local is really where you can make the most impact. So that was what I was focused on the show, and that's really where my political career has been focused.
Well, you gave me a lot to work with there. I've got a few things I want to unpack for you. The first of which, coming back to your experience about once politics gets in your blood, it doesn't really get out. Has that been your experience working with both people passionate about politics and in politics for as long as you have? That it takes kind of a special kind of person, and that kind of person is liable to get it in their blood and it doesn't get out? Yeah,
it's very addicting because it's one of the few things that you can do and really impact other people positively. There are people that get into politics for the wrong reason, and usually they're the ones that as soon as they hit a loss, they're gone. You know, if they hit a roadblock, it doesn't give them the personal gain that they wanted. They go do something else. They go back into their careers.
It doesn't align with the kind of fantasy version of it in their heads they wanted it to be, and then
right. So, but there are those of us that we're more in the long run, and we look at what's going forward and what. And you know, sometimes it's small gains. You do something small that maybe helps just a local community. Sometimes you do something big that can have a larger impact. But
sometimes it involves just being involved in the media or messaging space and changing the conversation around a subject to allow legislative change.
And that's something that there are a lot of different hats you can play to be involved in politics. And it is everything from hosting a show to being involved in campaigns. There's just going out door to door for a candidate, or there's getting involved in the legislative side. And you can't do all of it. You kind of have to pick where you are. And I have, in the past 20 years, jumped from one area to another depending on where I was in my particular life at that time. And that's the interesting thing, is I've kind of bounced at it from different angles. But you can, it really, you have an impact. And politics and government, you have an opportunity to really impact your community. And there are there's just different ways you can change the narrative. You can, one of the things that's a good example of that, I have a nonprofit at the beach. It's called Better Jacksonville Beach. And I founded it 4 years ago because we had an image problem in Jacksonville Beach. On Memorial Day, which was a couple weeks ago,
was it dancing in the streets or whatever?
No, we had a fight that broke out, and it was two gangs got out there, and one guy was running.
You had another fight.
Yeah, but this one got viral, and the community really was upset by it.
Was this the really big one that hit the news? And
yeah, and it was just basically two rival gangs. we can really get into the depth of this, but Jack's Beach is we don't have a gang. We're a neutral territory. So the gangs who would traditionally come out there, they would just enjoy their Saturday and go home. Well, you had some young kids, and gangs are teenagers. They're high school age, and they were running their mouth, and one guy got run in his mouth and turned around, and the rest of the guys weren't there. So the other gang just beat the crap out of him. And of course, it's modern age. Everybody's got our cell phones. We videotape everything.
His buddies, and they came back.
Well, somebody just videotaped it. And so the crowd stood around and videotaped it, and it got on YouTube. It went viral. It was national news. And from that, I knew I needed to do something, so we formed Better Jacksonville Beach. But that was a long way in the story to get to what I want to say is some of the small things, talking about changing the narrative. And what we want to do is change the narrative of the area. So we do things like an art walk. I found and run the Jack's Beach Art Walk. We do car shows. But a little thing we did that actually has a more significant impact than people would really realize is we renamed the area. For some reason, our city for a long time kept calling it the Central Business District because that was the legal name. No, that's a ridiculous thing to call something. That's something you call it in a planning commission meeting or a city council meeting, but that's not something you call it in a public.
It's like after you open the instruction manual to the city,
right.
This is what it is in parentheses.
Yeah. And we just said, look, we're just going to start calling it the Jack's Beach Downtown. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't special, but we changed the narrative. And I realized about 3 months ago, the city issued a new plan for the area. And we're talking about rebuilding some of the parks and spending millions of dollars on this. But the name of the plan was the Jacksonville Beach Downtown Action Plan. It's a small thing. It didn't take a lot of work. It didn't make news. It didn't give me big rewards, but I can tell you it's a tangible result. It changes the way people perceive the area, and it was one of the small things we were able to do. And we were able to help change the narrative and the way people perceive the area, and we were able to change the way the city does that just as an outside group. And politics is that. Sometimes politics is controlling the narrative and getting people talking about what you want them to talk about.
Well, I think people think about politics in kind of a narrow way. They think, okay, a bill goes to Congress, it goes through Congress however they believe it goes through Congress. We can go back and forth about common folks' understanding of the legislative process. But it's change by degrees, I think, is the way change really happens. And little incremental steps that if you look at with a long enough lens or over a long enough timeline really add up to a whole character change in a community. And I think your experience with the way that went really speaks to that process and the way that kind of change happens.
Well, and I think if people watching this video, if there's one thing I want you to get out of hearing me talk and what's going on is that you can make a difference. But people get so caught up in the big things. I'm upset with Trump or I'm upset with Obama and, oh, I hate Congress. And you're trying to move the needle on a huge boulder that you're trying to move it one way and there's half the country's trying to move it the other way, and it's very hard to impact change. You can impact on the local level. You can impact in Tallahassee. You can impact and make small changes if you pick your battles well. And that's where I've had my success is I don't move the needle on large items. I find something I can do that I can make a change. I can make a difference.
Something small, specific, and actionable.
Right. And then I'm able to get the tangible results out of it. And I said, getting people calling Jacksonville Beach from the Central Business District to the Jacksonville Beach Downtown was a very small thing. But it's a good example of how you can make small incremental changes and actually get changes and show results and move to where you want to go instead of shouting at the TV because Bill O'Reilly's on and he said something you don't like. I guess he's not
hammering on the keyboard as hard as you can.
Yeah. Twitter, Facebook, and arguing about stuff that you're not moving the needle on.
Now, to kind of frame this, you've always had a passion for politics, or as you might say, it's been in your blood. You know, when we spoke last week, you said members of your family have a background. You would discuss these sort of things over the dinner table. Could you tell me a little bit more about what that experience was like? Yeah,
I think it's just one of those things that I come from a family that has that passion for service. My grandfather was he was a World War II generation, was at D-Day, but when he got back, he was an accountant in small town right outside of Columbia, South Carolina. It's not like Jacksonville where the county and the city is just this one massive thing. It's kind of like Orange Park, the town of Orange Park. So he was in Forest Acres, and he ran for city council, and he was involved in party politics. He was the treasurer, ended up being the treasurer for the state party because he was an accountant. And through that, he got to know the governor. And back in the 60s, when the U.S. Department of Labor was founded, there was the states were given an option to opt out. And in the ability to opt out, South Carolina, first to leave the Union during the Civil War, big state rights state, they opted to form their own Department of Labor. And Governor asked my grandfather, said, "Hey, will you run this, help us start this, and just kind of run it temporarily until we can get it going?" And he ran it for 20 years. My dad was involved in campaigns as a volunteer. He helped Cliff Stearns, who was, when Cliff Stearns first ran for Congress, and for those of y'all that don't know, Cliff Stearns was the congressman for kind of the Gainesville, Ocala area, and he got upset about 4 years ago, but he was a long-term congressman over there.
Yeah, I remember hearing that name for years and years and years.
He was a big player, and that's kind of been my path as well. I said, we just, there's something, I think it's just ingrained in my family. We want to do something that's bigger than us. And I think that is what you can do in politics. You can do something that's more than just you. You can be more than just going to work every day and working your 9 to 5.
You can say, here, if you look at the system with the right kind of eyes to see these problems, and that's something I'll get into in a little bit, but you really can make the kind of differences that, while it's not a night and day, I've turned the empire upside down and shaken things up, kind of things that we would want. It's something, a material difference that you can point to and say, it's by these, layers and layers of accreting changes that we really do get to a new and a better system.
Yeah, and that's how an everyday person can get involved. And I know later we'll talk about what I did in Tallahassee this year. My angle on that, my influence and my ability to do that was no more than an average person. I told a narrative, I knew the system, and that was where my advantage was. I knew how the system worked. But if you know the system and you understand how to make it work,
how to tell a story with the legislation, which for a lot of people, they're just going to look at the bottom line, kind of what are we changing, what are the differences in languages. But if you really can tie it to a greater narrative or put it into the kind of terms that their constituents and or turn it into a story that is going to touch people in a non-policy way.
Right. And that's it. And the community tends to get involved when it affects them directly. People forget that legislators, your city councilmen, the governor, even the president, they're normal people. We put elected officials on this pedestal, and we hold them to this impossible standard that, wow, they must be just, they should be this, and if they're not this, then they're corrupt and evil. Or
they're a combination of George Washington, Santa Claus, and Jesus.
Yeah. And people, we hold the position and we look at it that way, and then, but on the same time, we just tear them down constantly. And it's in a kind of this internal battle that the public has. But they're normal people, and some of them are younger than me. I mean, there are state legislators who are still in college. There are, it's just relations and getting to talk to them like a regular human being, and they listen. And they do genuinely care about the community, or else they really wouldn't be in this field.
Well, and they respond to the same kind of incentives that we do. Understanding their decision-making process as a person just like you and me, I think goes a long way to understanding the process by which you might change someone's mind or get them to support something or a change that you would like to see put through. And I would say that increasing people's knowledge of the system would be the greatest tool for them to use to achieving those changes they would like to see. Because I feel like that's why the process seems so opaque to many people, is that it is a little complicated if you're not versed in these sort of things.
Yeah, and on the other side, I know we're coming up on a hard break. On the other side of it, there's a book that I read. I think you need to constantly learn, no matter what your field is. Too many people think, I'm an expert. I know everything. I don't need to learn more. But really, as adults and as human beings, we need to continue to strive to learn more. And I recently read a great book that outlines this, and I've been handing it out to people because it was so good.
Well, we're up against it, but we'll see you on the other side. And we are back for our second segment here on the state of things. We're still with Jon McGowan, and we were talking a little bit about the state process. But in this segment, I'd like to get a little bit deeper into some of the work you've been doing recently with some of your projects. Could you tell us a little bit more about your involvement in the state legislature in these last couple of months?
Yeah, we're going to have to go into a little backstory on this one.
Yeah, sure.
But I recently had a pretty good legislative success. It was quite honestly, it was my biggest legislative success, having been involved in politics for so long. But I had a PR nightmare about 2 years ago. Talked to the first segment, I used to own a gun store. Early in my gun store, I did what every small business owner usually encounters, and this is an extremely common thing. We got a little behind on the sales tax. It was a couple $1,000s. It wasn't like I was $100,000 in debt. Department of Revenue contacted me, said, "Hey, we want you to, we need to get this settled." We worked out a deal, got it paid off. Somewhere in the line, somewhere in the process, it never got registered. It paid off.
The money went, and everything was materially taken care of.
Yeah.
But their system didn't check the box.
Yeah. Bureaucracy is always fun. There are a lot of good people in government, and I think that's saying we demonize government. But there are some bad people in government, and it's just like your job. Wherever you work, whatever you do, you know that one guy that just keeps screwing it up? That was the guy that was in charge of my account. So instead of crediting it the right way and making it go away, they decided to issue a warrant for my arrest. So July 2015, I'm driving, it was the 11th, I was driving home from my business. We were going out of town the next morning. It was a Saturday. My headlight was out. Got pulled over by Neptune Beach Police, and couple cops pulled up. I thought, these are some of the guys I know from my store. It was a warrant, so I ended up going to jail that night.
Did they frog walk you?
What do you mean?
Did they? I mean, was it the whole the whole 9 yards with the cuffs and the whole?
Yeah. Yeah, I went downtown. I got handcuffed, went downtown, had my mugshot taken, had to spend the night in jail. Fortunately, my wife and my mother bailed me out that night because it was a warrant that was issued in advance. There was already
a phone
bail.
Call your mother expected to get much earlier in your life?
No. I grew up in a Baptist family. I've always been, I see things pretty black and white, and I always try and stay on the clear path. But this was a horrifying experience. I'd never been arrested before. I'd never been on the wrong side of law enforcement before. I said, when the cop showed up, I thought it was just a sergeant coming to hang out with me. When he saw my name, which would not be the first time it's happened.
They knew who it was.
And I do a lot at the beach, so they normally know me. So yeah, I spent the night in jail, had the mugshot, bailed out. My bail posted the next morning, but it was an embarrassing thing, and obviously it was a complete nightmare. And I can't tell you the psychological toll that sort of thing would take.
Leading your life for so many years in such a manner as to, I'm trying to avoid this specifically.
Right.
And then, despite your best efforts, having the caprice with which they enforce stuff goes to the bureaucracy.
Well, and it's amazing. The Department of Revenue basically has debtor's prison. They think you owe money, and they can issue a warrant and have you arrested.
Which I remember hasn't been a thing since like the 1800s.
It's supposed to be illegal unless it's the government that owes you money, or that you owe money to the government. But it was a bad experience. We got it cleared up. The charges were dropped. Everything was supposed to be taken care of. But some people that don't like me.
So this was after the fact. It was you'd worked through the problem. You thought everything was taken care of. Your mind's off it, and you're on to the next thing. When?
And this was not like, we just got past it. I'm talking 5 years later. I actually had an outstanding warrant for 2 years and didn't know. During that 2 years, I served on the transition team for the mayor. I was working with the state attorney on her reelection campaign. I was very involved. I wasn't hiding. It just, nobody knew. And I had a federal firearms license. The ATF Like, I mean, I wasn't hiding. I just didn't know, and if I had known, I would have got it fixed immediately. But,
well, it sounds like not only you didn't know, they didn't know that they didn't know.
Yeah, it was quite an ordeal, and it's one of those things that when you go through it, I wish I had never gone through it, but there is some good that's come out of it.
Well, it's just you describing it. It's the kind of thing that you'd see in a law school hypothetical and go, this would never happen, right?
Right.
But lo and behold,
it did. And what's amazing is there are companies that we know, they owe hundreds of thousands of dollars to the state. Never had a warrant issued. Never had a problem. They're not even making payments on it. Mine was over a few $1,000s. And it just...
Like what? A sole proprietorship?
Yep.
Yeah.
It just a pretty minor thing, but somehow that's just the way it fell apart. The system was broken, but where I really saw the flaw in the system was after my arrest. We'll be working on the Department of Revenue at some point, but for now, what we worked on this last legislative session was based off of what happened next. My mugshot got out there. This was a misdemeanor. I remember this was a misdemeanor and the charges were dropped. My mugshot got out there. Then February 1st, this was 7 months after the arrest. This was 6 months after the charges had been dropped. It was front page news of the Times-Union. This is not a secret. I mean, I'm not breaking news to you guys and nobody knows I was arrested. It was, and I don't mean like, oh yeah, it was on the fold. It was the headline, Florida Times-Union, and then me. And what caused it was I had gotten a grant from the city.
It's terrible, but in a way, it's kind of flattering.
Yeah, I know. I guess. Thanks.
Hey, and here I have you on the show. So.
Yeah, infamous. Yeah, so it was front page news, and then that turned into a whole nother nightmare scenario. And they were going after me. And
I'm sure that created its own little news cycle just from that you then had to deal with.
Yeah, and there are people. The truth is, if you're involved in politics, there are people that don't like you. There are people that don't like you because of something you did to them. Granted, I get it. It's a contact
And you
sport.
could go into politics with your sole goal being, I want everyone to like me, and you're still going to have committed people who hate you.
There are, yeah. And they're probably going to be commenting on the comments section of this YouTube video about I'm a liar and this is what happened. But, so they harassed me. They were going door to door in Jack's Beach to the businesses and handing out my mugshot with no explanation of what was going on. Every time I get involved with something, they send my mugshot out. And the reason, and really the core reason that was what sparked it, was that sort of the vicious attacks on me and attack on my character.
On a person like yourself, who your reputation and the opinion of you in the community is your currency. It is your stock and trade.
Yeah, and that really was harmful. And I did. I lost a lot of my influence during that time. But there were a lot of good elected officials that stood with me. They understood. There were some that, they kind of, you got to be smart with how you do it. And that, but really nobody that had any influence turned their back on me. But it was a rough period.
Did it open your eyes maybe to the real substance of some of your relationships, your political relationships with some other people? Kind of a, if you're going to stick with me kind of thing.
Yeah, it really, you find out who your friends are. But what I was really surprised about was the people that contacted me that I didn't think I had that kind of relationship. And it's amazing the people that reached out. I'll tell you, Lisa King. Lisa King is a diehard Democrat. She just ran for chairman of the state Democratic Party. When Mayor Curry went to reappoint her, or decided that he no longer wanted her on the Planning Commission, and there was this big public battle, I was with Mayor Curry on that against her, but we still were friendly in it. You could still be on opposite sides and still have a good relationship.
It's just being able to separate the business and politics from the this is how I feel about you as a person.
And she was one of the first people that contacted me that morning. In fact, I think she's the one that told me I was in the paper. She sent me a text that morning. So it was quite an ordeal. And the problem that I saw was my record was public for so long. My record is actually, at this point, still public. This is 2 years later. You can still go to the Clerk of the Court's website and read it. And that needed to be fixed, because our judicial system on a national level, from our Constitution, from the foundation, is based off of the premise that you are innocent until proven guilty. And that is how you're supposed to be treated. I was proven innocent. The charges were dropped. Yet I was still treated as if I was guilty by the judicial system because my record was still out there and people could still make a request and get the mugshot. You can have your record sealed. You can have your record expunged. And for those that don't know the difference, a sealed record, it is still available to law enforcement. It is available to the state attorney.
But not in sort of the public access
But the
manners.
public can't have it. An expunged record, it's deleted. It never happened. So what I did was try and fix the sealed process.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the legislature. We met with. I just started working my way through, and I started in January, and that's key because
you got there before everyone else.
I got there before everybody else. Session starts usually in non-election years around March, but they do committee meetings, and I was there the first week of committee meetings, and all the legislators are there. But you don't have all the people that are typically there. The lobbyists are around, but you don't have tour groups.
But they're more concerned with their drinks at lunch than with meeting with
Right.
so-and-so. So it was kind of like going to the TPC on Tuesday when it's practice day and you can actually walk up to the golfers and...
That's exactly it. And so I went and shopped this proposal, and my proposal was what ended up being what we call an administrative seal. So now when your charges are dropped and the state attorney files all the paperwork to close your account and it goes, or your criminal case, and it goes into the system that the charges were dropped, or if you were found not guilty, there's an additional piece of paper that'll go into that, and it'll seal the records, and the judge just signs it, and it seals the records automatically at that point in time. And where that changes is currently when you apply, it can take up to 10 months for a record to be sealed. You have to go through FDLE, you have to go through the state attorney, then the judge has to sign off on it. And it's a very long, drawn-out process. And that's 10 months that people can still, harass you and bother you. And you know what? Mine was political. Mine was PR. Mine was just
But I can imagine a very similar circumstance with maybe competing business owners, or, there's a million different ways this could happen to be damaging.
And I can tell you where it really is damaging is the people that, it's the minority community. There's a disproportional amount of minorities that are arrested. The judicial system, that's a whole other debate. But that is a reality, is that it's a disproportional amount of minorities are in jail, whether it's black or Hispanic or that's our prison population. But they also get charged more, and they get charged, and if the charges are dropped, and then they go apply for a job, and somebody does a background check on them, it's not me. I can bounce back. If I'm, my business is my business, and I may lose money, but I'm still making money. You get somebody who needs that job and they're unemployed and they go to apply at Walmart, and Walmart does a background check on them and finds out they got arrested for stealing something, and it shows up in that background check. So for 10 months this guy goes in to get arrested, and get a job, and he can't get a job because it shows up because they judge, and society will judge based off of that. They'll judge. There are people that are going to watch this and judge and say, well, you know what, he was arrested, so he probably did something. But that's not the reality of it. Innocent people go to jail. Innocent people are charged, and that's why we have a judicial system. And those are the ones that really, in the long run, are going to benefit the most out of it. It's the people that are lower income and the people that need that job and need to make it through the background check.
Well, what have the results been so far with the actions you've taken in state Congress?
We worked it through. It's state legislature. See,
State. Yeah, sorry.
No. But you bring up a point. Most people pay attention to the national level, and I early on made that mistake. But I call it Congress, but it's the state legislature. We've actually passed both the House and the Senate unanimously, which is just unheard of for a first-year bill. Most bills don't get picked up.
Congratulations, by the way. On
Appreciate that. Yeah, that was a big accomplishment. So in 5 months, from idea to end, we actually got it through both houses of the Senate.
Which in legislative time, that's like going faster than the speed of light. I can't describe to you how fast that is.
My original plan on this was it was going to be a 2-year.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to take at least 2 years before it even got picked up.
Give them the idea, let the idea get traction, and then hope for something next session or next year in the next session.
Yeah, and right now it's sitting on the governor's desk. So the governor has been sent it. It was sent last week. He's got 15 days to either sign it, veto it, or just let it become law without his signature.
Well, before we wrap up here, I'll just say, Governor Scott, we got our fingers crossed.
We're coming up. It's on the 20th, so is his deadline.
And we are back for our third segment of The State of Things, joined still by Jon McGowan. Now, we went into the break, Jon, speaking a little bit about your perspective on the state and local political process. Could you speak maybe a little bit more to that and what we were discussing over the break?
Well, that segment got eaten up by telling the story because it was it's a long story that has so many.
But it's important.
It's important. It has to. The narrative kind of has to be set up so that you can see what to do next. But I think it'd be good to talk a little bit about the process itself, because the process to a lot of people seems very daunting. And I in the first segment, I talked about a book. And for anybody that's interested in getting involved, it's called America, the Owner's Manual. I have nothing to do with this book. I just read it. I bought it because a new issue came out. It was written by
this is not a plug, people.
not a sponsored plug, but it was a good book. And being somebody that's worked in politics for a long time, you can't, it was nice to see something that plainly laid it out. And when I read it, I didn't go, that's not the way this works. But it was written by former Senator Bob Graham.
It was digestible.
Yeah, and it was clear and it made sense. So it was written by Senator Graham, and then Chris Hand. Senator Graham wrote it about a decade ago, and then Chris Hand, who was Alvin Brown's chief of staff, went through and helped him re-edit it recently. So you've got two Democrats that wrote the book, but it's not about partisan politics. It's
about how it works.
Right, and it was a really good view for a beginner and somebody that wants to get into it. And it gave you a lot of tricks and a lot of things that those of us that have been in it are familiar with. And that was what I did. I used my experience to help me with this last bill, Senate Bill 118. It's going to be ingrained in my brain forever, but
it's going to be on your tombstone one day. Senate Bill 118.
It was my crowning accomplishment because, as I said, it was a proposal that I created, I wrote, I shopped, I got it put into a bill, and it passed the legislature. And hopefully, because it passed unanimously, the governor will sign off on it. But when you're dealing with people, you've got to relate to them. You've got to be able to talk to them as an individual and not just throw your facts at them, which is what a lot of people do. But you also need to know the process.
Well, I think it's the process of persuasion where people understand with their head, but they buy with their heart.
Well, and that's good for the conversation and good for when you're talking to the elected official, but you also have to know what to do, how to work the process to get what you want done.
Absolutely.
In the book was actually a good story about Senator Graham, when he was in the legislature, was speaking at a high school. And when he spoke at the high school, some high schoolers came up to him and complained about something, and it was a minor thing that actually should have been fixed through the administrative process of the school board. But they had gone to the mayor, they had gone to their legislator, they had gone to all the wrong people, and they wasted all their time, and they had not gone to the person that was the decision maker. And that's the hard part. Sometimes you got to follow the process. And I see people in government all the time, in politics all the time. They complain to the mayor about something the mayor has no control over. They complain to their city councilman about something.
It's like writing a letter to the president when your 401k doesn't do what you want it to do. Of course you have a magic wand that controls the economy.
Yeah, and it's true. I got a email yesterday. Somebody had a question about a pothole repavement in their neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And so let me get you in touch with the right person. And it was your district councilman for that area. He's like, oh, don't pass the buck, John. Handle this. I was like, well, I'm not your elected official. I'm more than happy to help you out. I will help you out. I can do this.
It sounds like it wasn't don't pass the buck. It was, could you please do this for me, John?
Well, no, I think he was genuinely upset that he didn't understand that I didn't have the power to do it.
Yeah.
That's where, honestly,
knowledge of the process.
That's where lobbyists come into play. That's why you hire a lobbyist. We demonize lobbyists. And I have a lot of good friends that are lobbyists because it's just all one big circle.
So do I. And I've noticed that they don't have tails or scales or, other reptilian features.
Yeah. I mean, they will sell their soul to the group that that makes money, and they'll pay them. But what you're paying them for is because they understand the process. They know how to make the right connections. And when you get involved, you just kind of got to know where to start. And for me, it was starting during committee weeks and starting meeting with legislators that were on the criminal justice subcommittee on the House, or it's just a criminal justice committee.
Now, was this you learning the process, or was this you knowing enough about the process to know this is where you started?
I knew where to start.
Okay.
And I went through and met with, my original plan was actually to find a bill that was already written and get mine added as an amendment. And I wanted to have the committee do it. So I met with the subcommittees on the House and the committee on the Senate, and every committee member, I sat down with every single one and said, this is what is going on. This is my narrative. This is the story. This is the fix. I want you to be aware of this during this session so that if something comes up, I want this to be in the back of your mind. And if you see an opportunity, let's take it and let's see if we can make it happen. Fortunately, it worked out so it became its own bill. But that was my starting point.
Did you had an idea, and this is just my interest as a political observer, did you have a style of bill that would be going through that you would want to attach it to, or anything in your mind where it's like, okay, we need this kind of thing going through that we might be able to tack it on to?
Bills, you kind of got to find something that works with it. So I was looking at anything that had to do with some sort of judicial reform.
Yeah.
And where it ultimately ended up is there's been a push in the legislature for about, as long as I've been paying attention, dealing with these websites that publish mugshots. And the bill comes up every year, making it illegal for a website to post your mugshot, and then every year it fails. That's the one we ended up being added onto, and it passed this year because it was just the right time. And timing's everything in this as well. There are a lot of issues that I care about that I'm not talking about right now, and I'm not working on them right now. There's some stuff in Jacksonville Beach, which is, I'm very involved in Jacksonville Beach, is where I live. But there are some things in Jacksonville Beach that I care about. There's a change I want to make. I shopped it. I went, and the city manager, and we have a city manager form of government, said, John, hold off on that. We got to fix something else. I'm patient. And with this bill, I actually didn't think we were going to get it done this year. I met with the senator. It was Senator Stubbe, and it was he said he wanted to do it, then he looked at it and said, I think we're going to get some pushback from the First Amendment group, which is exactly what we're getting pushback on right now. But he had a higher priority. I said, well, we'll do it next year. And then there was an opportunity. So patience and understanding these things take time and working through it. So you got to know where to start, and you got to understand it's going to take time, and you got to understand, work the system and do the research, and talk to people that have gone through it, and talk to people that have been involved. But timing's everything.
Well, it's interesting to hear that they're arguing it from a First Amendment perspective, because it's almost as if both the paper and the person who leaked the photo were unjustly enriching themselves on a falsified conviction. I mean, the whole chain of who's justified here, no one's justified at any point.
Right. And it's an interesting issue. If we go back to the issue itself, it is a mentality. If somebody was arrested, they must have done something wrong. And that is the argument we've been getting against this. Oh, well, what about these guys who've been accused of rape and they're sexual predators, but they just weren't convicted, and then they're going to go work with our kids? Well, they weren't. First of all, they weren't convicted. They were charged, and they weren't convicted. And whether you have difficulties getting a charge or not in a rape case, I
would come back and say, sir, the facial hair and eyeglasses that you have make you look like a pedophile. I don't think you should be able to drop your daughter off at my child's school.
Right.
It's okay, let's see if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander.
Well, and that's kind of where they pushed it. But what they fail to talk about when we get into facts is sealed records are still available when you do a background check for working with kids, being a teacher. They're still available. So it's still there, but that's why we got the First Amendment issue. And that is part of this, is not only do you need to know the process, you need to know who your opponents are going to be. And I knew I was going to have opponents in this. I didn't tell anybody I was working on this. I went and met in the legislature. Nobody locally knew I was doing this except for the mayor and maybe a couple council members that I had really good relationships with, and I knew they would keep their mouth shut.
Well, it sounds like we've talked a little bit about the process of all this, but if we were to maybe take a broader view of what the state or what we could do as a city to really improve our citizens' understanding of these kind of problems. I mean, I know civics is something that used to really be taught in schools, maybe when my father and grandfather were going through, but the closest I ever got was social studies,
Right.
which is just history. What are your thoughts maybe on that?
I think that public education is a brutal beast where it's such a big debate, and
there's so much more to it that I can
Right.
understand.
I think that getting people to have a basic understanding of government, how government works, where they can make an impact, what they can do, we would have a more
realistic understanding of what kinds of government impact their lives.
Right. And that's the thing. We get, once again, talking about national, people get so caught up in the national level. We're talking about the Paris Climate Accord, and Republicans are upset and Democrats are upset. You know what? That really isn't going to have that much of an impact on you.
Because it was a non-binding agreement to begin with, and it wasn't ratified by the Senate.
Right. Non-binding agreement. Some of your taxpayer dollars are going to go to it. You were probably going to, if the country paid what they said they were going to pay, it probably would have cost you $1 or $2. But people are more irate about that than what's going on in their local government.
Which is amazing to me. I think that speaks to where people interact with the news versus where they used to. People are sitting down behind a TV, sitting down behind a screen, and looking at the biggest stories. The biggest stories are national, where, 1923, people were going to a city council meeting and hashing it out there with people who disagree with them, which I would think would give a much more realistic understanding of where politics happens for most people.
Well, and that's talking about city council meeting.
Or just those kind of more
right.
embryonic local.
Well, and government was more face to face. But there's just a small group of us that are involved at different levels. And after we had lunch a couple of days ago, and I was driving back, I was thinking about this and the different levels of government, and I was thinking, local city government, that's kind of like Pee Wee football. There's a small group of people that really care about it, and it's probably the parents, and they really are super involved. And
that one mom's really invested.
Yeah, but the people that are involved can actually impact that, and it has a bigger impact on them because it's their kid. It's their, that kid is.
Or it could be the easement for their sidewalk, or
right.
whatever that issue is, their issue.
Yeah, that's local government. It has a bigger impact on you. Then you get into, county government. That's kind of like high school football. You got a few more people are paying attention. You get a little more of that team mentality.
Is there an interesting maybe dovetailing there because the city of Jacksonville is the county of Duval in 1968 when I can't remember the term for it.
Consolidation.
Yeah, consolidation. Thank you. Is there kind of an interesting dovetail there where those two sizes of government kind of mishmash?
No, you get a little bit of that. It's more county. Of course, I live in the beach, and we didn't participate in consolidation. We have 3 independent cities at the beach. Yeah, we're
damn holdouts.
We're holdouts. And then the town of Baldwin is not consolidated as well. So I actually get both levels of government. But I grew up in Arlington. I grew up in Jacksonville, and so I'm used to that. But Jacksonville's so large. So it really is still a county level government at that size. It does have a direct impact on you, but it is that larger thing where it gets larger. But then, but where people focus is the NFL. You know what? Yeah, we care about the NFL. I'm going to sit here and yell about the Jaguars, and I'm going to yell at the TV, and I'm going to watch it every Sunday. I'm not going to miss it.
Do you want to watch Adrian Peterson, or do you want to watch Bob Sixpack tote the rock?
Right. And it's so sexier and so much easier to pay attention with. But ultimately, your impact is so minimal. Here's your hat. I got my Jaguars hat on. I got my Make America Great Again red cap. And you feel like you're contributing because you're a Jaguars fan.
We passed an ordinance, and all I got was this T-shirt.
Yeah. On the national level, there's not really a whole lot of moving the needle. But when you get back down to that small level, and then the local, and state's about as big as you can impact. State is as big as you can impact without having a
massive organization.
Yeah, organization, money. In 20 years,
access, the kind of connections that you would have to have.
Yeah. In 20 years, I've only moved one thing on the national level, and it was simply the narrative and getting somebody to talk about what I wanted to talk about. And it was just a congressman. It was Rutherford. I got him to do something because I hammered him about it during his campaign, and I had a relationship with him and was able to do it.
Well, we are up against it for our third segment here, but we will see you back for our last piece when we return. Hold on to your pants. We're here for the last segment of The State of Things. I'm C.K. Slater, and this, of course, once again, is Jon McGowan. We wanted to maybe just try and put a bow on things for today. Do you have any maybe takeaways from your perspective on our state and local political process?
Well, first of all, if y'all have made it to the fourth segment, thank you.
Yeah, we really do appreciate that.
You know, talking about policy and process is not the sexiest thing.
No.
But I wish
maybe
more,
to weirdos like us.
Yeah,
but
to people like us. But I wish more people would get involved and more people would do it. And that's really, I said in the beginning, you know, understand the process, be involved in the process, be involved locally. Don't get distracted by the things you can't control. And that's so easy to do, is you just end up chasing things that you can't impact. Because
people look at what's going on on TV and they want their involvement to be able to impact that, when you have to understand that you impact the pond that feeds to the lake, that feeds to the river, that feeds to the ocean, and that's the ocean.
Right.
Like you have to understand the cascade of causality there, where your impact here is then going to have a larger impact through the whole system.
And it is. Yeah, I mean, you're dead on that. But there's also people dismiss it because they want to see the bigger thing. But those guys that are in D.C., the guys that are doing the national politics, the people on the international level, they started locally. And I mentioned right before the break that I was able to get Rutherford to talk about something. It was the red snapper ban.
Mm-hmm.
Red snapper ban was not my issue. It was the issue of the fishing industry, because
Could you tell me a little bit about it?
Basically, a few years ago, the environmentalists said there was not enough red snappers, so they were banned. You couldn't fish for them anymore. I think it was a snapper, maybe a redfish, red snapper. Here we go. It's not my issue.
I think they did the same thing for the Goliath grouper back in the day, and now there's everywhere.
Yeah, so off the coast of Florida, you can't fish for them anymore. It's illegal. If you catch them, you got to release them. Well, it killed the fishing industry. Recreational fishing, that was their big fish they were going out to get. And it turned out to be based off of some bad studies. They had done something weird with the studies. But it wasn't that I cared that much. I'm not a fishing guy. I'm involved in the outdoor industry. I put on an outdoor industry show. But I went to a meeting, and I heard what they were talking about. I said, I can fix that. But they'd been doing what I was talking about. They were beating their head up against the wall, fighting the battle in the wrong way.
Yeah.
They were going to town halls that were on this subject. And you know what? Going to a town hall on the subject is great, but that's the finish line. That's not where the debate takes place. Decisions don't get made in meetings. Decisions get made outside of meetings. They get made in one-on-one conversations with elected officials.
You should have had lunch and talked and,
right.
Gotten in touch with their people. And
public comment is a tool. It is not the whole method. And they were viewing public comment as the way to get things done.
Well, it's like the comment on the video as
right.
opposed to the process of making a video.
Yeah, and that's really what it was. So they had gone to town halls, they'd done all these things, and I was holding a debate for the people running to replace Andrew Crenshaw. I was hosting the forum, and I just made the forum.
But you want to talk about a pool that everyone jumped in.
Oh my gosh. But there was...
Of course, it's when Andrew retires. Everyone's been waiting for that district.
Everybody's been watching for that. So I brought it up with Rutherford, and he called me, and we had a conversation on the phone with him, because I had a relationship with him from when he was sheriff and before he was sheriff, and he was on my radio show, and I knew him through those circles. So the first meeting he had after he got elected was with these guys, and it was about, and now they're moving that on the national level just to fix this one thing that had a big impact on them, but it is a national issue.
Now, is the change like changing the way they study this to make sure these same kind of mistakes don't get made again?
Honestly, I just got the ball rolling.
So you're just, you don't know what's in it. You just know you're helping it. And that is not a judgment. That is
no. But it's fight the battles you can fight, and do what you can do. But there's a point where it wasn't that I needed to fight the fight. It wasn't my fight. I needed to get them fighting in the right arena.
Or
so
give
I got
them the playbook. This is how you fight the fight.
So I got them together, and I got the two together listening. I got the people that cared about it with the person that could do something about it, and now they're working on it, and I'm not even in the process.
And it's funny that you say that, because I do think that's where the lobbyists and the political consultants, where their understanding of the process really allows people to turn their passion into action.
Right. And that's what it is. And that is what people like I do. And I've been on all sides of it. I don't know where
I felt like that was a mission statement for, we turn your passion into action.
That's it. That's going to the new consulting firm.
Yeah.
But yes, I haven't been in consulting for a while. I do odd work here and there.
Bring your issue to do we screw them and how?
Yeah. But it's finding the right place and getting people connected. So find your issue, get involved. Do your homework first, though. Don't just run full speed into the wall. But if there's something you care about...
Well, you don't buy a new air conditioning system before you get on Amazon for 12 hours and look at all the reviews.
Right. But people will jump in on an issue without doing their homework. And ask. You know what? If you need something, you can call an elected official or their staff, and do not discount the value of staff. They're the guys that do the job day in and day out. This
is what they do, is wait for a good constituent call, wait for an issue to be brought up that needs the representative's attention. That's a lot of their job.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're the gatekeepers as well.
Yeah. Well, and understanding, this is a little bit from my experience up in DC, but if you could get in tight with someone's executive scheduler who knew where they were going to be, right, you had it. You could get them any time of day.
Yeah, that's they're a great resource. But so many people dismiss them. Mm-hmm. They care about the elected official. One of my first meetings in Tallahassee on Senate Bill 118 was with a legislative aide. And the legislative aide is the person that works with a state rep or a state senator in Tallahassee. Mm-hmm. That was one of my first meetings. I called to have a meeting with the representative. I got passed off the legislative aide. A lot of people would just said, we're okay. I went and took the meeting, but it was a great meeting. She had insight on it. She'd been in the process. She showed me something an angle I hadn't thought of. In that particular meeting, it was the the Black Caucus. Get with them. They've been fighting this issue. They've been fighting this issue for years.
Oh yeah.
And they couldn't get it done. I just happened to be the right guy to get it done. I had the right connections, the right approach, and I was able to get it done. But they'd been fighting this issue long before I'd come around. There's value but the point is, you can ask them for help. If you know somebody that's involved in politics, you can go, hey, where do I start on this? What do I do? And they can help you and guide you through the process.
I think a good thing to remember, too, is that if you're passionate about something, you're probably not the only one.
Right.
And being able to find passion for the same issue elsewhere and being able to tap into that group, which I think speaks to the caucus.
Yeah, and there's so many different resources out there. Sometimes people want to reinvent the wheel. And you don't have to. If there's somebody out there that already agrees with you, there might be an organization already in place, and you can just go get involved with that organization. We were talking during the break about restoration of felons' rights. Mm-hmm. So for those of you who are curious what just happened, the memory card got full, so we have to start all over. We're not starting all over. We're just going to kind of pick up. But we were talking about
technical difficulties occurred.
Hey, we've talked about this. I do a video series for Better Jacksonville Beach. I have a podcast called A Shot of Politics. I was on the radio for a year and a half.
Which I'd love to join you on one day, maybe.
I got to figure out what the direction we're going with it. But yeah, you're definitely welcome to come out. Yeah, it's doing these things are a lot of work and things can go wrong. Technology is fun, but back to what we were talking about. It is a there was an infrastructure in place. You can get involved with the infrastructure. You can get involved in
take that first step. Put that first sign in a yard during a campaign. Meet the people who can show you the paths through which you can turn your passion into action.
Right, and don't be afraid of it. And so many people are scared and afraid. We had a meeting in Jack's Beach recently, and during the public comment section, a friend of mine wanted to speak, and she was so nervous. Her husband had been on the council For 8 years, her husband ran for state house, but it had never been her. She'd always been behind the scenes, so she had to go up and speak, and she was so scared. You know, people are so scared of public speaking anyhow. They're so intimidated by talking to people of power.
It helps if you hide it behind a camera.
Yeah. Hello. You get out there, and there's these natural fears we have, and it shouldn't be an intimidating process. And there are people that are probably going to look at me and say, "Oh, you can do this on the federal level. You just don't understand the process." Well, I like state and local anyhow, but once you understand the process, it's not scary. They're normal people. They're regular people like you and I. They're approachable. They'll listen. There are going to be some bad actors. There always are. It's just like any field.
I found a good rule of thumb I generally assume, regardless of the party or regardless of the position, that elected officials in their heart of hearts are acting in good faith. They do what they are doing, they believe is in the best interest of the country. So if you can approach anybody from, I understand you're doing what you think is right, I find it's much easier to build some of those connections there.
Yeah, and as long as you have that right approach and that right mindset, you can do a lot more. And don't get worried, don't get so fixated on party labels when you're doing the process. Party labels are for campaigns. But when you need to get something done, it doesn't matter whether they're Republican or Democrat. If you can get them to agree with you, my bill passed unanimously. That means both parties in the legislature voted for this bill. And I took meetings with Republicans and Democrats.
And when you said that, I literally expected a pig flying right outside the window.
But honestly, it's not that uncommon. There are issues that are very divided, and issues that these are the ones we fight about, and they're partisan issues. But day-to-day government, especially local, city, county, state, there are the divided issues. But 90% of what they do is not a divided issue.
The dividing issues just get an outsized amount of attention.
Correct. Because it's easy, it's sexy, and it's a fun, it's fun
bleeds,
to debate.
It leads.
Yeah, and we can sit here and argue about Obamacare up and down and ACA, and people will get so passionate about it, and it's Republican versus Democrat and partisan, but the day-to-day operation isn't that. 90% of what your legislator does is not that sort of stuff. Most of what they do is actually constituent services. It's helping you out.
Answering the phone calls in the congressional office.
Yeah, and figuring out what you need. And I need somebody to fix my pothole. I need somebody to I got this issue with Department of Revenue. I've got this thing going on. Can you help me out? And
I need to get the parking approved for my small business,
right.
Or I need to get this zoned a certain way, or I have a access lane that I need to get put through, or I need an easement through someone else's property to get access to mine, or whatever that might be.
So so that's not partisan, but also don't take no as personal either. I've struggled with that early on in my political career. No was like a personal affront, but no, just you're going to run into that. You figure out a new way and a new approach, but I need this parking in my my lot. Well, you can't get that because the guy next door, it's going to infringe on his property rights. You got to look at the bigger picture. But it's a good process. It's not scary. It shouldn't be scary. It shouldn't be intimidating. It shouldn't be overwhelming. Roll up your sleeves, get involved, get out there, and just learn the process. And if you really want to learn, I said, go pick up that book, America, the Owner's Manual. It's by Bob Graham. It's a really good entry, good talking points, and it'll get you in the right direction. And feel free to reach out to people that are involved that and ask their advice.
Well, John, I think you've done a pretty good job of really crystallizing the need to take that first step of getting involved, and maybe taking that leap of faith where it might seem scary or new or strange. But if you're passionate about an issue, I can guarantee you're not the only one. And a great place to find other passionate people is in just these sorts of organizations. I'd like to thank you very much for joining me here today. This has been a pleasure, and I can tell you that I would like to have you on again. But for all you folks out there who have been watching, I hope you found this educational. Please do like and subscribe below if you've enjoyed the content. But otherwise, I will see you next time.